Phoenix, Arizona. Midnight. Rain on empty pavement and a gas station buzzing at the edge of everything. At the far end of the parking lot, a rusted RV sits under a flickering light. A handwritten sign taped to its side, $10. A girl with a backpack and wet shoes reads it and laughs. Not because it's funny, because it's the only thing left. She buys it. Inside, past the broken cabinets and hanging wires, there is a door that should not exist. Metal, locked, scratched by hands that came before hers, and in a hidden cabinet, a name, her dead father's name, written on papers no one was supposed to find. She presses a button on the third step. The floor opens. 18 feet below, a Phoenix parking lot, 40 server racks are running. 12 screens glow in the dark, and on one of them a live camera feed. Her street, her house, the mother who didn't turn around. Someone has been watching for years. The night her stepfather told her to leave, he didn't raise his voice. That was the part she remembered most. Not the words, the quiet. His voice so flat it didn't even have the decency to be angry. Like she was a bill he'd already paid, a problem already solved. He stood in the hallway with his arms crossed, and he said the words, and then he went back to his chair. And that was that. Inez stood in the hallway for a moment longer than she should have. Her backpack was already on her shoulder. She'd packed it 2 weeks ago, not because she'd known it would be tonight, because she'd known it would be some night. She waited, just to see. Her mother, Diana, was in the kitchen. Inez could see her through the door frame, the back of her standing at the counter with both hands flat on the surface, not doing anything, not washing dishes, not making coffee, just standing there with her face turned slightly toward the window above the sink. She knew. Of course she knew. Inez waited 3 more seconds. Then she picked up her backpack and she walked out the front door into the rain. She didn't run. There was nowhere to run to. She just walked down the driveway, past the car that wasn't hers, past the mailbox with a name on it that wasn't quite hers either, past the edge of the porch where the light fell, and into the dark where it didn't. The rain hit her the moment she stepped out from under the overhang, not hard at first. The kind of rain that started gentle before it decided what it was. Within a block it had decided. Her jacket was soaked through before she reached the corner. She didn't hurry. Where was she going to hurry to? She walked 3 miles in the rain without a plan, which wasn't exactly new, but usually when she walked without a plan, there was a home at the end of it, a door she had a key to, a bed that was hers, or at least hers for the night. Now there was nothing at the end of the walking except more walking. She thought about calling someone. She went through the list. Because there was a list. Because at 17 you kept a list of people you could call if things went wrong. The list was supposed to get longer as you got older. More friends, more connections, more people who had a couch you could ask about. Hers had gotten shorter. Her phone was at 8%. She didn't call anyone. She sat down on the curb outside a gas station at the edge of town. The fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered. The parking lot was mostly empty. One car with its engine running. A man at the pump, looking over his shoulder like someone was following him. Inez pulled her knees to her chest. Her jeans were wet through. Her shoes had that squishing quality that meant they were done for the night. She opened her wallet and looked at what was in it. $11, 3 ones, and a single $8 bill she'd been carrying since Tuesday, plus some coins she couldn't be bothered to count. $11. She'd had more than that once. She'd had $50 once, saved from 3 weeks of work at the smoothie place that had closed in August. She'd had $50, and then the smoothie place closed, and then there were groceries, and then there was the school thing, And then there was the other thing, and now there were $11. She closed the wallet. She looked at her phone. 8%. She thought about her mother's hands on that counter, the flatness of them. Don't, she told herself. Not right now. She looked up. That was when she saw the RV. It was parked at the far end of the lot, half in the light and half in the shadow. Big, old, the kind of vehicle that looked like it had opinions about being owned. The body was rust-colored in patches, which was just rust, not a design choice. 2 of the side windows had long diagonal cracks held together with tape. The tires were heavy and flattened by everything sitting on top of them, and taped to the side in handwriting so bad it almost looked intentional, a piece of cardboard. For sale, $10. She actually laughed out loud. In the rain, sitting on a curb with $11 and a dying phone. Because $10. Because, of course, she stood up. Just to look at it, she told herself. Just to have something to look at that wasn't the road stretching in both directions toward nothing. She walked over. Up close, it was worse. Or better, depending on what you needed from it. The dents were numerous and deeply committed. The door on the driver's side had a handle repaired with something that wasn't the original handle. A small wind chime hung near the rear door, 3 aluminum tubes that made no sound because there was no wind under the overhang, just quiet hanging. Inez put her hand on the side. The metal was cold, which made sense. Metal was just metal, but something pulled her forward anyway. A man stepped out from around the back of the vehicle. She hadn't heard him coming. He was old, late 60s, maybe older, wearing a jacket that had been waterproofed a long time ago and was now just a jacket. He had eyes that were tired in a way that wasn't about sleep. He looked at her, not a stranger's look, the look of someone trying to confirm something they already knew. She said, "How much again?" He said, "10. She said, "Does it run?" He said, "Sometimes." She raised an eyebrow, meaning elaborate. He said, "Sometimes is enough." She looked at the RV. She looked at the man. She said, "I've got 11. He studied her face, just for a second, just long enough for her to feel it. She said, "Can you take 9? I need to keep something for food." He didn't answer right away. He kept looking at her, and then he said, "What's your name?" She blinked, because that wasn't the usual next move in a negotiation. She said, "Inez." He went still, not dramatic still, not shocked still, more like a person who had been waiting in a train station for a very long time and just heard an announcement. She said, "Inez Varga." He said, "Yeah." She said, "What?" He reached into his jacket pocket, brought out a key. One key, no ring, no fob, just the key on its own. He said, "He told me you'd come. Didn't say when, but he said you'd come." She felt something go sideways in her chest. She said, "Who said?" He said, "Your dad." The rain was still coming down, soft now, but steady. The fluorescent light buzzed above them. She said, "My dad is dead." He said, "I know that's what you were told." He held the key out toward her. She said, "What does that mean?" He said, "It means take the key." She didn't move. He said you'd know what to do with it. His words, not mine. She was 17 years old, and she was standing in a parking lot at midnight with $11 in wet shoes and a backpack with everything she owned, and a man she had never met was holding out a key and telling her that her dead father had said she'd come. She took the key. He nodded. He said, "There's a box in the cabinet under the sink on the right side. Stuck. You'll need to pry it." She said, "What's in it?" He said, "I don't know. Wasn't my place to look." She said, "Why did you keep it?" He said, "Because some things are worth keeping until the right person comes." He turned to leave. She said, "Wait, what do I owe you?" He looked back. He said, "Nothing. It was never about the money." And he walked away into the rain. She stood there holding the key. She stood there for a full minute, maybe more, just holding it and watching the space where he'd been. The wind chime moved, one small tap, like it was trying to say something polite. She looked at the RV. She looked at the key. She got inside. The door groaned when she opened it, a long, low sound, the sound of something that hadn't moved in a while, and was surprised by the request. The smell inside was layered, dust and old fabric and something metallic underneath the kind of smell that took years to build, but it was dry. That was the first thing she registered. Warm enough, dry. She stood inside the door and looked around. It was worse on the inside than the outside. Wires hanging from a panel near the ceiling. Cabinets with doors that didn't sit flush. Linoleum flooring that had given up on its pattern somewhere around the second decade. A small table that folded out from the wall. Torn upholstery on the seats near the front. But solid. The frame was solid. The bones were fine. She dropped her backpack onto the nearest seat, and then she looked toward the back, a narrow hallway, short, just a few feet, and at the end of it, a door, not like the rest of the RV, metal not laminate, old, deliberately old rather than just worn, a keyhole but no handle, just the keyhole and around it scratches in the metal. The kind of scratches that came from multiple attempts with wrong keys. Inez looked at the key in her hand. Don't she told herself. The practical thing was food. The practical thing was sleep. The practical thing was making a plan for tomorrow for the job she needed to find for the $11 that were 10 after she bought something to eat. Survival. One thing at a time. She turned away from the door. She went to the cabinet under the sink on the right side. It was stuck, like the man said. She had to use the flat end of her house key as a pry tool, wedging it into the gap and working it back and forth. The cabinet gave eventually with a sound of deep resentment inside a small metal box, about the size of a thick paperback book, old, rusted at the edges. But the lid was closed and the latch was intact. She lifted it out and set it on the folded table. It wasn't locked, just stuck along the seam, the metal slightly swollen from years of temperature change. She pried it open. Papers, a stack of them tied with faded string that had been red once and was now something closer to brown. She untied it slowly, laid them out on the table one by one. Old receipts, numbers, addresses, technical drawings she couldn't read, notes in handwriting she didn't recognize, and then she turned over a page and she stopped. A name. Her hands went completely still. She looked at it again. Same name, clear. Her father's name, Mace Varga, written in a margin beside a series of numbers she didn't understand. She flipped to the next page. His name again. Next page, again. She sat down hard on the torn seat. Her father's name, in a box, in an RV, in a parking lot, in a city her father had never, as far as she knew, spent significant time in. She turned pages faster now, addresses she didn't recognize, dates going back 8 years, her father's initials next to things she couldn't decode, and then at the bottom of the stack, not papers, a folded note, smaller than the others, written on plain white paper, not the official-looking sheets above it, written in red ink that had bled slightly into the paper over the years. She unfolded it. 3 lines. Ines, back door, 3rd step from the left. Press and hold 3 seconds. Dad knows you'll come. She read it 3 times. She turned it over. Blank. She turned it back. Her name first, before the instructions, before anything else. her name at the top of the page in red ink. This was written for her, not for whoever found the RV, not for anyone in general, for her specifically. Her father had written this note and put it in this box and put this box in this cabinet, and he had written it down, that he knew that she would come, which meant he was not entirely gone, which meant something about the story she'd been told was not entirely true. She sat with that for a long time. Outside, the rain had gone to nothing, just the sound of water draining off the roof and dripping from the overhang into puddles. The gas station buzzed. A car passed on the road, and its headlights swept briefly through the windows. She folded the note and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket. She got up. She walked to the back of the RV. The hallway was 3 steps. She counted them because the note had said 3rd step. The back door was to her left. Metal, no handle, just the keyhole, and below it a series of steps you'd use to go out the back. 3rd step from the left. She stepped down. 1, 2, 3. She pressed her foot down on the edge of the 3rd step. Nothing. She pressed harder. Nothing. Press and hold 3 seconds. Not step, press. Her foot or her hand. She crouched down, ran her fingers along the edge of the 3rd step. On the underside of the riser, just where the step met the wall, a small raised circle, like a button built into the structure, covered with the same material as the step, but underneath that, when she pressed metal, she pressed. 1 second, 2, 3, a sound. Not loud, just a click, and then a hiss like something pressurized releasing. And the back wall, the wall she'd thought was solid, the wall at the very end of the hallway behind the metal door, shifted, not opened, shifted, the bottom of it separating from the floor by 2 inches, 3 inches 4. She grabbed the edge, pulled, the wall swung outward. Behind it was not another wall. Behind it was a staircase, going down. The cold hit her first. Not the outside cold, something deeper than that. The cold of underground spaces sealed away from weather and season and the ordinary temperature of the world. The cold of something preserved. She stood at the top of the stairs and looked down. Dark, complete dark at first. And then from somewhere below, the faintest suggestion of light, blue-green, the color of standby electronics, the color of things that were still running. The smell that came up was also underground, earthy and mechanical, at once the smell of concrete and metal and something electrical underneath. Not bad, just old and sealed. She reached for the wall and found a light switch, exactly where a light switch should be. She flipped it. The staircase illuminated. Concrete steps, not RV building grade material, but actual concrete, poured and set, the kind of thing you put in a structure meant to last. A railing on the right side, 8 steps down, at the bottom a hallway, and at the end of that hallway, a door. Open! She stood at the top of the stairs, and she did not go down immediately. She stood there with one hand on the wall, and she thought about every practical reason not to go down, about the man who had sold her the RV, about a father she'd been told was dead for 5 years, about a note with her name written at the top in red ink, about her mother's hands on the kitchen counter, flat, not moving. She went down. The bottom of the staircase opened into a room that was nothing like she'd expected. Clean. That was the first thing. Not sterile, but maintained the way a space looked when someone had been keeping it up until recently. The floor was sealed concrete. The walls were lined with metal shelving, and on the shelves, filing boxes. Dozens of them, stacked neatly labeled in a handwriting she recognized from the note upstairs. her father's handwriting. She turned. There were 3 more doors opening off this main room. She could see into 2 of them from where she stood. One was full of equipment, server racks. She didn't know computers well, but she knew the shape of infrastructure when she saw it. Towers of black metal with small lights blinking in patterns. The other room was smaller, a bed, made, the kind of made that meant someone had smoothed the blanket flat, tucked the corners with intention, a jacket hanging on a hook by the door, and the main room she was standing in had its own feature she hadn't seen at first, hadn't seen because she'd been looking at the shelves on the far wall. Screens, not a television setup, not entertainment. 12 monitors arranged in 3 rows of 4, set up for someone who needed to see many things at once. 10 of them dark, 2 of them active. One showed a map. Phoenix, the area she knew with small green indicators on it, moving and still. And one. She walked toward it slowly. One showed a street. She knew that street. She had walked down that street 2 hours ago with a backpack over her shoulder and wet shoes and $11. She had walked down that street and turned left and walked until she reached the gas station. The camera was positioned near the corner, clear enough to see the front of a house, a porch light, a mailbox, a car in the driveway. Her house, the house she'd just been kicked out of. Her father had a camera on her house. Her father, who had been dead for 5 years, had a live camera feed on the house she'd just been kicked out of. She stood in front of the screen and watched the empty street. The porch light was still on. The car was still in the driveway. The house was quiet and still and looked like all the other houses on the block, like nothing in particular had happened there tonight. Like it wasn't the place where a woman had stood at a kitchen counter with her hands flat on the surface and not said a single word while her daughter walked out into the rain. Inez realized her hands were shaking, not dramatically, just slightly, the way hands shook when they had been holding something tight for a long time and finally let go. She sat down on the floor of the concrete room, not in a chair, on the floor, her back against the wall and her knees pulled up and her shaking hands in her lap. He knew I was coming. He knew this night would happen. What else did he know? And then something shifted in her chest, something she hadn't expected, something that cracked open in a place she'd sealed shut 5 years ago when they told her he was dead. Not grief this time. Something harder to name, something that felt like the very beginning of hope, or the dangerous edge of it, where hope and hurt were so close together you couldn't tell which one you were standing in. She looked at the filing boxes on the shelves, dozens of them, her father's handwriting, years of it. She looked at the screen showing her street. She looked at the jacket hanging on the door in the small room. She pulled her father's note out of her jacket pocket. Read it one more time. Dad knows you'll come. Not new, knows. Present tense. She sat on the concrete floor of a room that should not have existed underneath an RV that should have been junk, and she thought about everything. She thought she'd understood about the last 5 years of her life. She understood nothing. She was cold. She was exhausted. She had $11 and no plan, and wet shoes, and a phone at probably 3% by now. But for the first time tonight, she was not afraid. She was something else entirely. She was in the right place. She pulled the nearest filing box off the shelf, set it on the floor in front of her, opened it, and she started to read. She read for 3 hours, maybe 4. She lost track of everything except the pages turning and her father's voice coming through them, which was not the voice she remembered exactly, but was close enough that it ached. He wrote carefully, ordered, one thing at a time. He explained Project Hollow the same way he'd explained things to her when she was small, starting with the foundation building up, making sure each layer was understood before he added the next. He wrote about the years before he faked his death, about the moment he understood what he'd built, about the specific evening he'd sat at a terminal and watched the system do something it shouldn't have been able to do, and understood that he'd handed something irreversible to people who couldn't be trusted with it. He wrote, "I built a tool for people who said they wanted to keep the country safe, and I believed them because I wanted to believe them, because believing them was easier than the alternative." He wrote, "The alternative is that I help build something that treats every ordinary person in 14 cities as a potential threat. The alternative is that I have to decide what to do about that." He wrote, "I have been deciding for 3 years. This journal is part of the deciding." She turned pages. He wrote about Diana, not much, not directly, but enough that she could read between the lines. He wrote, "She knows more than she's supposed to. I told her too much in the early days before I understood the scope of it. I should have protected her better. Now I protect her the only way I can, which is by staying away, which is the worst kind of protection and also the only kind I have." He wrote, "She will not come to me. She will not lead them to me. She is protecting something I can't ask her to protect any other way. And she knows that. She has always known that. She is smarter than I am about some things. This is one of those things." He wrote, "I watch the cameras. I watch her. I watch Inez. I know that watching is not the same as being present. I know that knowing your daughter is okay is not the same as being there when she is not okay. I know this. I am telling myself I know this so that I don't pretend otherwise." He wrote, "Inez will be the one who finishes this, not because she has to, because she will understand it correctly. She always understood things correctly, even when she was small. She never accepted an explanation that didn't make sense. She'd ask until it made sense. She'd push until you either gave her the truth or admitted you didn't have one." He wrote, "She's going to be angry with me. She should be angry with me. I'm angry with me. But I hope she understands that every decision I made was made with one question in mind: is Inez safe?" He wrote, "The answer was always yes, because of Diana and because of Otto, and because I built a room and I waited." And then on the last page, no longer the ordered, careful sentences of the rest. These were shorter, like he was running out of something. He wrote, "If I don't make it to her before she makes it to the room, then something went wrong. If something went wrong, I'm sorry. Not for the work. The work was right. I'm sorry for the years. I'm sorry for the silence. I'm sorry for the camera in the laundromat parking lot, which I know is strange and I know is not the same as being there." He wrote, "She's going to figure out the part about her mother. She's smart enough. When she does, I need her to know that what Diana did was not weakness. What Diana did was the hardest thing I've ever watched anyone do." He wrote, "Tell her the truth and let her decide. That's all." He wrote, "I love you, Inez." And that was the last page. She closed the journal. She sat in the underground room for a long time. The servers hummed. She thought about a question her mother had asked her 3 days ago, called her into the bedroom just to talk supposedly. But then, do you know that you're strong? Not are you strong? Do you know that you are? Like the believing was the thing. She stood up. She put the journal in her backpack. She went back upstairs. Otto and Lena were still outside. They looked up when she came out. Neither of them asked how she was, which was the right call. She wasn't sure she had an answer. She said, "He wrote about my mother." Otto said yes. She said, "He said she knows." Otto said she has always known. She said about the room, about all of it. He said about the broad shape of it, not the details, but enough. She said she married him, that man, the one who kicked me out. She married someone she didn't love. Otto was quiet. She said to protect me. He said that's what I understand. She thought about 5 years of watching her mother in a house that didn't fit her, a woman who had been someone specific, someone precise and funny and sharp, becoming quieter year by year, becoming smaller in a space that should have been too small for her. She thought the grief had done it, the loss. Except it wasn't grief, it was strategy, which was somehow worse and better at the same time, and she didn't have the vocabulary yet for how to hold both of those things together. She said, I need to think. Lena said, we have time. Probably. Inez said, probably. Lena said, the signal from the room just came online tonight. When you crossed the threshold at the bottom of the stairs, it triggered everything. I've been monitoring frequencies associated with Helixon infrastructure for 2 years. When this location lit up, I came immediately. She paused. If they are watching the same frequencies, they know the location is active, but they may not know anyone found it yet. They might think it's a technical glitch. Inez said, how long until they come to check? Lena said, could be tomorrow, could be tonight. Inez said, then we don't have time. She went back to the control center. She sat in the chair. She looked at the 12 screens, the map, the camera feeds, the green indicator showing the system running 40 million people who didn't know their data was inside this network, who'd gone to bed tonight believing their private lives were their own. She looked at her hands. Her father had built the kill switch for her fingerprint, not because she was the only capable person, because she was the person he trusted. He'd looked at all the other options and ended up at Inez. That was both the most flattering thing anyone had ever done for her and also possibly the most unfair. She was 17 years old. Dad, she thought, I'm 17. He knows, and he still chose me, which means he thinks I can handle this. He's probably wrong. He's never been wrong about me before. And then from somewhere in the back of her mind, unwelcome and exact, neither has Mom. She stood up. She walked out of the control center. She walked up the stairs. She went out through the back of the RV into the parking lot. She called her mother. It rang twice. She'd expected voicemail. She'd expected something to stand between her and this moment. Her mother picked up on the second ring. Diana said, Inez. Not surprised, not relieved, even though she should have been after last night, after a daughter walking out into the rain. Just Inez, like she'd been waiting by the phone. Inez said, you planned it. Her mother was quiet. Inez said, last night, you planned it. He was going to kick me out and you let it happen because you needed me to go to the RV. Her mother said, I needed you to be somewhere safe. Inez said, safe. You call a parking lot safe. Her mother said, safer than here. A beat. Inez said, how long have they been watching the house? Her mother said, a long time. Inez said, them, Helixon. Her mother said, yes. Inez said, and you couldn't tell me. Her mother said, no. She said, because then they'd know you told me. Her mother said, yes. She said, and they'd know I was going. Her mother said, yes. She thought about the woman who married a man she didn't love, so she could be a neutral variable. So Inez could leave on a night that looked like a normal domestic crisis and nothing else. So there was no conversation, no warning, no visible connection to follow. She did all of that. She said, you stood at the counter. Her mother said, yes. She said, you didn't turn around. Her mother said, and her voice was different now, stripped of the careful neutral it had been carrying for years. No, ma, I didn't. She said, That was the hardest part, wasn't it? Her mother was quiet for a moment. She said yes. Inez sat down on the ground next to the RV. The parking lot was cold and the concrete was rough, and she didn't care. She said, Dad wrote about you. Her mother said, I know he kept journals. She said, he said you were smarter than him about this. Her mother said, about some things, she said, he said, what you did was the hardest thing he'd ever watch anyone do. The line was quiet. She said, Mom. Her mother said, I'm here. She said, I found the room. I know what's in it. I know what he built. Her mother said, I know. She said, there's a decision I have to make. Her mother said, I know that too. She said, I need you to tell me if you're safe. Her mother said, I'm fine. She said, that's not what I asked. Her mother paused. She said, if you do what I think you're going to do, there will be a period of difficulty. For me, for him. She said, the man I don't call Dad. Her mother said, yes. She said, but you'll be okay. Her mother said, I've been managing difficult situations for 5 years. I'll manage this one. She said, Mom. Her mother said, Inez. She said, I understand now. The counter, the not turning around. Her mother said, you were always going to understand. You just needed the information. She said, you could have given me the information. Her mother said, no, I couldn't. She paused. But I could ask you a question and hope it landed. She said, do you know that you're strong? Her mother said, yes. One beat. She said, you know what to do. Her mother said, your father chose right. He always chose right about you. She said, I love you. Her mother said, I love you more than you know. She paused. That's not a contest. It's just the truth. The line stayed open for another moment. Her mother said, go. And then the call was done. She sat on the concrete for another 30 seconds, let the night air be cold against her face, looked up at the sky, desert sky, enormous, the kind that made you feel small in a way that wasn't threatening, just accurate. 40 million people. They wake up tomorrow and none of this has changed. Or they wake up tomorrow and everything has. She stood up. She went back inside. Lena and Otto were in the main room, now having come down while she was on the phone. Lena was at the desk in the control room, not touching anything, just reviewing. Otto was standing by the shelves with his arms crossed, in the posture of a man who had been standing and waiting for years and had gotten good at the weight of it. A knock on the RV door above them stopped everything. All three of them looked up at the ceiling. The knock came again, 3 times, patient, not urgent, not a raid. The knock of someone who had decided to be polite about this. Lena said quietly, don't go up. Inez said, they know we're here. Lena said, probably. Otto said, definitely. The knock came a 3rd time. Then a voice through the door, male, unhurried. He said, my name is Stroud. I'm with Helixson's security office. I'm not here to threaten anyone. I'd like to have a conversation. Lena said, don't. Inez said, I know. She went up anyway, because she needed to see him, because she needed to understand what was coming, and you couldn't understand what was coming from underneath the ground, because something in her needed to look at the man on the other side of 5 years of her father's fear and see what he actually was. She opened the RV door. He was older than she'd expected, 50-something, built like someone who had once been physically imposing and had shifted that into something more contained as he aged. A gray suit that fit well and wasn't trying too hard. No weapon visible, no threatening posture. He stood 2 steps back from the door with his hands at his sides, palms toward her. He looked at her. She looked at him. He said, you're his daughter. She said, obviously. He said, you've been down there. She said, obviously. He said, how long? She said, "What do you want?" He said, "To give you an option before you do anything that can't be undone." She said, "What's the option?" He said, "Walk away, take what you found, or don't take it, leave it here, doesn't matter which. Walk away and we close the file. You were never here, you never found anything. You go live your life and none of this touches you." She said, "What about my father?" He was quiet for a beat. He said, "I don't know where your father is." She said, "Is he alive?" He said, "I genuinely don't know. That's the truth." She looked at him. She said, "And if I don't walk away," he said, "then we're in a situation that gets complicated for everyone." She said, "You mean complicated for you?" He said, "I mean complicated for you. I mean a 17-year-old in a legal situation involving federal security contracts and corporate infrastructure. I mean years of that, not months, years." She said, "You're threatening me." He said, "I'm describing a situation." She said, "Those are the same thing." He said, "I prefer you saw it as a warning." She looked at him for a long moment. This was the man. This was what all of it had been building around. Not a monster, not obvious, just a man in a good suit who had been making pragmatic decisions for so long that he'd stopped noticing when they crossed lines. She said, "Do you know what it does? The system. To actual people. Do you know what it means? That 40 million of them are in it." He said, "I understand. It's a significant program." She said, "That's not an answer." He said, "It's the answer I have." She said, "Then we're done here." She started to close the door. He said, "Wait." She stopped. He said, "Your mother." She didn't move. He said, "She's been cooperative. We'd like that to continue." She understood what he was saying, the architecture of it, the implication underneath the polite words. She's been cooperative means we have leverage. We'd like that to continue means don't make us use it. She looked at him. She said, "My mother is not in this." He said, "She's been adjacent to it for 5 years. She said she's a civilian who remarried after her husband died." He said, "That's one way to look at it." She said, "It's the true way." He said, "Truth is something people argue about in courtrooms. We'd prefer to stay out of courtrooms." She said, "I think you're afraid of courtrooms." He said, "I think you're 17 and you don't fully understand what you're standing in the middle of." She said, "I think you're standing in a parking lot at midnight talking to a teenager because you're out of better options." He said nothing. She said, "You came here to talk me out of it. That means you can't stop me any other way. That means the thing my father built is exactly what he said it was." He said, "The thing your father built will cause significant disruption to legitimate security infrastructure." She said, "Legitimate." He said, "Yes." She said, 40 million people, he said, are safer for it. She said, "Without their knowledge." He said, "Knowledge isn't always." She said, "I'm done." She closed the door. She stood inside the RV for a moment, heart going faster than she wanted it to, hands not shaking this time, which was different, which felt important. She heard him on the other side of the door. He said, "You have a few minutes to reconsider." She said, "I'll use them." She went back down the stairs. Lena was on her feet. Otto was by the door. Lena said, "How many?" Inez said, "Just him that I saw." Lena said, "There won't just be him. He came to the door because he's the face. The rest are somewhere nearby." Otto said, "How long do we have?" Inez said. He said, "A few minutes." Lena said, "So we have less than that." She went to the control center. She sat in the chair. She looked at the screens. She looked at her hands. 40 million people who woke up every day and went to work and came home and sent messages to people they loved and bought groceries and walked through the world believing The invisible infrastructure of daily life was neutral, just roads and cell towers and public cameras and payment systems, believing it watched traffic and not them. She knew what it meant to know they were being watched and not be able to tell them. She knew what it meant to be able to tell them. She thought about the courtroom Stroud mentioned, about the years he'd described, about a 17-year-old in a legal situation that went on for years, about what that meant for school and for the future and for the ordinary things she hadn't let herself want because they'd felt too far away. That would be hard. She'd done hard before. She reached forward. Her finger hovered over the keyboard. Lena said, "There's a prompt you have to go through first." He built it with a confirmation sequence so it couldn't be triggered accidentally. 3 screens. Each one will ask you to confirm. She said, and then Lena said, then it asks for the fingerprint. The sensor is on the right side of the keyboard, built into the housing. She said, after the fingerprint, Lena said it goes. All of it, simultaneously irretrievable. She said, how long does it take? Lena said, 30 seconds from fingerprint to transmission complete. She said, and then Lena said, 200 journalists, 40 federal oversight offices, congressional intelligence committees, and it archives to 3 independent servers in 3 countries simultaneously, so it can't be pulled back. She said, he built that part too. Lena said, he thought of everything. She said, almost everything. Nobody said anything to that. She pressed the first key. The screen changed. Confirm activation level 1. Are you prepared to proceed? Yes or no? She pressed yes. The screen changed. Confirm activation level 2. This action is irreversible and will result in full public disclosure of all stored data. Are you prepared to proceed? Yes. No. Yes. She pressed yes. The screen changed. Confirm activation level 3. Place your right index finger on the sensor and hold for 3 seconds to authorize. She looked at the sensor housing on the right side of the keyboard. Small, metal, a slight depression where a finger would rest. 40 million people, her mother standing at the counter, her father in this chair building this for 3 years, planning the moment when a person he trusted would sit exactly where she was sitting. He said she'd know what to do. She placed her finger on the sensor. 1, 2, 3. A sound. Low. Sustained. Not an alarm. More like something releasing. A system doing what it was built to do. The screens changed. All 12 of them simultaneously. A cascade of activity she couldn't track. Numbers and addresses and data packets and connections opening and closing the room suddenly full of light and motion on every surface. And then 30 seconds later, silence. The screens went back to their baseline. The green indicators on the map, the camera feeds, ordinary. Except every server in the room behind her had changed pitch. The hum was lower now. The hum of something that had finished its primary task and was running on maintenance. Lena said very quietly, it went. Otto said nothing. Inez took her finger off the sensor. She sat back in the chair. She looked at the map screen. Phoenix, green indicators, 14 cities, 40 million people who would wake up tomorrow to news that would change what they understood about the infrastructure of their daily lives. Who would wake up tomorrow with information they should have had years ago? It's done. Dad, it's done. I hope you're somewhere you're going to find out. She stood up. She walked out of the control room, out of the main room, up the stairs, through the back of the RV, out into the parking lot. The night was cold and still, and the sky was enormous, and the gas station buzzed at the far end of the lot. Stroud was gone. Of course he was. When the signal went out, he would have known. His phone or his earpiece or whatever he was monitoring would have told him. And a man who had spent 30 years making pragmatic decisions would have immediately started making the pragmatic decision about what came next. She didn't know what came next for him. She didn't know what came next for Helixson, or for the 14 cities, or for any of the complicated machinery of consequence that would start turning now. That's for other people to figure out. Lena is good at figuring that out. Lena came out behind her. She said, "It's going to be a long few months." Inez said, "For who?" Lena said, "For everyone, but for some people more than others." She said, "Not for us." Lena said, "We're going to be asked a lot of questions." She said, "We'll answer them." Lena looked at her. She said, "You're remarkably calm." She said, "I'm not calm. I'm just finished shaking. There's a difference." Lena said, "One more thing. Caspian Rue, the senior technical director your father worked with at Helixson, he contacted me the moment the signal went out. He's cooperating with federal investigators. He knew this was coming. Maybe not tonight specifically, but he knew." Inez said, "Is he trustworthy?" Lena said, "He's protecting himself, but his protection requires telling the truth. So for now, the overlap is good enough." She nodded. Otto came out last. He stood next to the RV and looked at it with the expression of a man who had been waiting a long time for something to be over and was not entirely sure how to feel now that it was. Inez said, "Thank you for keeping it for 5 years. He said it was the right thing. She said it was also a long time. He said some things are worth the long time." She sat on the step of the RV. She looked at the parking lot, at the fluorescent lights, at the sky beyond them, at the night that had started as the worst night she could remember and had become something she didn't have the right word for yet. She pulled out her phone, battery at 11%. She'd somehow managed not to let it die entirely. She called her mother. One ring, her mother said, "Inez." She said, "It's done." Her mother said, "I know." Her voice was something between not crying and not relief, in the exact space those two things occupied together. "I know." She said, "Are you okay?" Her mother said, "I will be." She said, "The other man, he's going to need to leave." Her mother said, "He was always going to need to leave." She said, "Mom." Her mother said, "Inez." She said, "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand." Her mother said, "You were never wrong to be angry. I didn't do things the right way. I did things the only way I had." She said, "I know." Her mother said, "Your father, if he's somewhere out there, if he can, he'll find a way. That's who he is." She said, "I know." Her mother said, "Go rest, Inez." She said, "I don't have anywhere to rest." Her mother said, "Yes, you do." She looked at the RV. She said, "Yeah." Her mother said, "I love you." She said, "I love you too." She ended the call. She sat on the step of the RV. Otto sat down next to her, not saying anything, just sitting. The presence of someone who had nothing to say and understood that presence was the thing. Lena was on her phone, already walking in slow circles near the edge of the parking lot, talking in the quiet, urgent voice of someone who had a story to file, and the clock had been running since the moment the signal went. The gas station buzzed. Somewhere a car passed on the road, and its headlights swept across the lot and faded. Tomorrow is going to be complicated. Complicated is fine. Complicated means it happened. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She looked at it. Unknown number. She opened the message. 2 words. Good girl. And below that, a string of numbers. Coordinates. She looked at them for a long time, a location she didn't recognize. Not Phoenix, not anywhere she'd been. She looked at Otto. He was reading the message over her shoulder. He said, "I don't know what that is." She said, "I do." He said, "You sure?" She wasn't sure. She was 17 years old and she'd spent one night in a parking lot and found a room underground and read her father's journal and pressed a button that would take months to unravel and called her mother and sat on a concrete step with a man she'd met 4 hours ago. And now she had a set of coordinates on her phone from an unknown number. She wasn't sure, but she wanted to be, which was different from before. Before tonight, she hadn't wanted much of anything because wanting required believing things could be different, and she'd stopped believing that somewhere around year 3 of watching her mother get smaller in a house that didn't fit her. Now she wanted to follow the coordinates. She wanted to find out what was at the end of them. He chose me because I push until I get the truth. I'm not done pushing. She put the phone in her pocket. She stood up. She looked at the RV, at the rust and the cracked windows and the wind chime that was still hanging at the rear door. 3 aluminum tubes. She could hear now that the night was quiet enough. A small sound, a tap and a tone, the kind of sound a thing made when the air moved through it and it couldn't help but respond. This is mine. Not the underground room, not the servers, not the evidence she'd sent out into the world tonight. This, the parking lot, the cold, the sky, the choice she'd made, and the choices still ahead of her. I packed that backpack 2 weeks ago. I knew too. She didn't know she knew, but she packed it. She prepared. She did the thing her father did, which was to get ready before you were sure you needed to be ready, which meant she was more his daughter than she'd remembered. She turned back to Otto. She said, "I'm going to stay here tonight." He said, "The RV." She said, "It's mine." He gave it to me. He said, "It's not exactly comfortable." She said, "I've slept in worse this week." He looked at her, the tired eyes that were less tired now, she thought, or maybe she was reading into it. He said, "There's a real bed downstairs." She thought about the made bed, the blanket pulled smooth, placed there by someone who had known somehow that she was cold. She said, "I know." She said, "Tomorrow I'm going to figure out where those coordinates go." He said, "You don't have to do anything tomorrow." She said, "I know, but I want to." He nodded. He stood up, brushed off his jacket, looked at the RV one last time. He said, "He was right about you." She said, "He usually was." He said, "Almost always." She said, "Almost." He said, "Good night, Inez." She said, "Good night, Otto." He walked across the parking lot and into the night. She sat back down on the step. Lena was still on her phone, voice low and fast, working through whatever came next in the chain of tonight's events. At some point, the calls would stop and the questions would start, and there would be months of things she hadn't thought through yet. There would be lawyers, probably. There would be people in suits who weren't Stroud and weren't friendly in the way he wasn't friendly. There would be the ordinary machinery of consequence. She knew that. She was 17 and she knew that, and it was fine, because she also knew something else, something smaller and more immediate and more real. She was sitting on the step of her RV in a parking lot in Phoenix with $11 and a charge phone and a backpack with everything she owned, same as 3 hours ago, except she had her father's journal in her backpack. She had a set of coordinates in her phone. She had a mother who was going to be okay. And she had, for the first time in 5 years, the feeling that the ground she was standing on was not going to disappear. She looked up at the desert sky, still enormous, Still full of stars, the city lights didn't entirely wash out, still doing what the sky did at this hour, which was be there unchanged, dependable in the way very large things were dependable. Okay, Dad, I've got it from here. She went inside. She went down the stairs. She lay down on the made bed. She pulled the blanket over her, and it was the right weight, the specific right weight, the weight of something chosen carefully by someone who had known somehow that she was cold. She closed her eyes. She slept.